in Israel from a Korisho newspaper. I may sound very American, but I lived in Israel since I was 2, so I'm more Israeli than American. I just tell you that I flew in this morning from Israel, and when I gave my passport and passport control, the guy told me, "Welcome home." And I didn't really feel like I was back at home, so kind of that explains maybe that place that I'm in. I want to introduce the panelists in this panel. I've been looking forward to it. We'll start with ladies first, with the former Knesset member Azaria. She was a member of the Jerusalem City Council. She established the Yerushalmi Municipal Political Party in 2008, representing pluralistic views and young families. As a young family in Jerusalem, I could definitely thank you for a lot of things that you've done. She was elected to the Knesset, the 20th Knesset. It was I wanted to say the last Knesset, but it's not the last Knesset anymore. It's 2 Knessets ago.
But it's the last government.
It's the last government, okay.
We can't form a government, so.
And you were the member of the Finance Committee, the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, and the Ethics Committee. And we have Michael Koplow, the Israel Policy Forum's Policy Director, based in Washington, D.C., a regular contributor to Foreign Affairs and Foreign Policy magazine. Michael writes a weekly Koplow column and edits the Israel Policy Exchange. And on my the far left...
Probably not, but okay.
Not far left, but yeah, whatever. Mine, not theirs. You're on the far right. Dr. Daniel Gordis. Many of you probably read his recent book that came out about the We Stand Divided, a rift between American Jews and Israel. It was published just past year. He is a senior vice president at the Koret Distinguished Fellow at Shalem College, the author of 12 books. Gordis is a regular columnist for Bloomberg Opinion. So applause for our participants. And we had an introduction email here, and it was interesting kind of to hear. There was a debate between Daniel and Michael regarding Daniel's last book. And I like the piece he wrote in the New York Times promoting the book, saying that if Benny Gantz would be elected as prime minister in Israel, that doesn't mean that we would solve all of the tensions or the rift between Israel and the Jewish community, because there are people in Israel. It's not just one Benjamin Netanyahu. There are people with certain views, and they may not connect with the American ones. Am I correct until now?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And Michael wrote a piece not agreeing with that part.
Well, he wrote a piece about the book, not about the New York Times.
Exactly.
Yeah, actually, I agree.
You mentioned the New York Times, right? And then also it'd be interesting also to hear Rachel afterwards as a politician. That whole issue of how much the politicians have an influence on the people and what's going on there. And Benny Gantz is not the head of the party that you were a member of, but you may have opinions on that. So let's first start with your criticism, I would say maybe, or your reaction to his book.
Sure. So I'll let Danny characterize his book since he's the one who wrote it. But you can correct me if I mistake. So Danny's basic thesis in his book is that the rift between American Jews and Israel isn't over what Israel does, but what Israel is, meaning that it isn't necessarily connected to specific policies of the Israeli government. It's more connected to the idea of Israel as a Jewish state. And that's where I differ from what is, in all other respects, an excellent book. I think there's no question that Israeli Jews and American Jews are different. I think that it's fair to have a debate over this peoplehood question that we've been talking about all day, whether it actually is accurate to characterize all Jews everywhere as one people, or whether there are things that are so fundamentally different about Israeli Jews and American Jews that ultimately make this peoplehood question a difficult one to answer. But I think that American Jews certainly support Israel as a Jewish state. While there are elements within the American Jewish community that are anti-Zionist, non-Zionist, perhaps ambiguous about Zionism. I don't think that characterizes the American Jewish community overall. I think that the American Jewish community overall is deeply Zionist in the sense that it does support Israel as a Jewish state, understanding that Israel is not the same thing as the United States and is going to look different. I think that much of the discontent in American Jewry right now is precisely over specific Israeli policies that American Jews have difficulty with. And where I certainly agree with the New York Times piece is I don't think that if Benny Gantz becomes prime minister, it's going to heal all ills between American Jews and Israel, but that's because of policy.
But will it heal part of them?
I think in the short term there will be. Listen, I work for a think tank, and I live in Washington D.C., and I spend much of my time up on Capitol Hill talking to politicians. Certainly, on one side of the aisle, Prime Minister Netanyahu, divorced from any specific policies he's advocating at the moment, just Prime Minister Netanyahu himself is deeply unpopular, and having anybody else as Prime Minister will, in the short term, I think, go a long way toward healing some of the issues that American Jews have. And frankly, I think that's whether it would be a Prime Minister Benny Gantz or even a Prime Minister who is significantly farther to Netanyahu's right, such as theoretical Prime Minister Gordis. I think that a lot of it is over Netanyahu himself and the specific ways in which American Jews...
Even if Gordis Sahar will not promote an egalitarian
correct, I'm saying in the...
right. And conversion laws will not promote them
right.
because
I'm
the
saying
government won't allow it.
Correct. In the short term, it's simply Netanyahu. But in the medium and long term, it's 100% over policies. Benny Gantz is not going to solve these problems because he, as well, will embrace policies that American Jews disagree with, and certainly someone like Gordis Sahar would be the same. So I really think it's a policy-driven argument more than anything else.
Okay, Danny.
So first of all, I'll just add by saying, as another Jerusalemite family, I was very grateful for the work that you did.
Thank you.
Not as young a Jerusalem family, but nonetheless, even as an Alta Kaker Jerusalem family, we really thought that you were a phenomenal breath of fresh air. So I'm grateful for all the work that you did and hope you will be back. In any event, look, I didn't say that American Jews are uncomfortable with the idea of Israel as a Jewish state. I don't actually think that sentence appears in the book. What I said is that Americans are uncomfortable with the idea of Israel as an ethnic democracy, and that the American project and the Israeli project are really antithetical in a lot of ways when it comes to being ethnic blind. America is, I'm doing a book talk in the next section, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I think that America was meant, we understand, to be ethnic blind. Give me you're tired, you're poor, you're hungry, you're teeming masses yearning to breathe free. I don't care what your race is, your ethnicity is, your religion is, nowadays your gender, your sexual orientation, I don't care. If you're a human being and you want to be part of the American project of infinite human potential and a new experiment in human self-government, come. That's what the Statue of Liberty means. You're part of this. 1917, His Majesty's government viewed with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. Not in any way to justify not giving minorities complete civic rights and so on and so forth, but they are fundamentally different enterprises. One is by definition embracing of all of humanity, and one is not. One has thoroughly succeeded because with all of the problematics of America, many of us in this room are the children, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren of people to whom America actually lived up to its promise. In other words, it made a promise to my Savta when she came in Ellis Island in 1908, and she never finished high school, and all three of her children did doctoral work. She lived in a very tiny little apartment in Borough Park, and all three of her children had, suburban houses. America did live up to that promise. America, in a lot of ways, again, it's a very flawed country. It's going through a terribly sad time and all of that, but America is an extraordinary success in many, many, many ways. Israel had a different purpose. Israel was to save the Jewish people. And Israel has lived up to that in many respects. I would say, by the way, the interesting test case is not Gordis Sahar. The interesting test case would be Bougie Herzog. And if Bougie Herzog was elected prime minister, he wouldn't change anything either. In other words, his attitude, and if Rachel Azaria, who I would vote for prime minister in a second, was prime minister, I'm guessing that you probably don't have a radically different conception of how to handle the Palestinians. You'll tell me if I'm wrong. I'd love to hear. Because the conversation that we always have in America about Israel is how long is Israel going to continue the occupation? The real interesting question is, how long are Israel's Arab neighbors going to be sworn on Israel's destruction, which puts it in a position of having no alternative but to stay in the territories that it unfortunately and unhappily finds itself. So I think where Michael and I disagree, and I think that yours was by far the most refined and dignified. I mean this really very seriously, and I wrote publicly as soon as you wrote your piece that I really admire. The world has become so toxic and so dismissive, and Michael disagreed with parts of my book, and wrote a really lovely piece. And the first thing that I did before even dealing with the substance, just thank him for that kind of tone, because that, if nothing else, is exactly what we mean. But Judith Shulevitz in the New York Times was a lot less, lot less gentle. And Eric Yaffe of the Reform Movement, kind of went ape 2 days ago. And he kind of completely lost it. But, I'll get the last word. But my point about all this is I think that American Jews, of course the occupation is a problem. Of course the occupation is a threat to Israel's moral fiber down the road. Of course the vast majority of Israelis don't want their kids patrolling Arab villages and being on top of a million whatever people in the West Bank. The number of people who actually celebrate the occupation in Israel is dismally small. Why is Israel, if it is lurching to, it's not lurching, it's inching to the right? Because increasingly, the number of kids who go to vote in the polls were born after the death of Rabin, were born after Oslo, were born after the beginning of the Second Intifada, practically, and they just don't remember anything other than conflict. They don't remember a serious peace process, and so they're losing hope. And the ideas that the left was promulgated on, land for peace, have long since been debunked. And we're in 2019. It's 19 years, almost 2 decades since the beginning of the Second Intifada. And here I will say, as a person who instinctively leans left, what does the Israeli left come up with to offer Israelis as an alternative to what it was selling in 2000, which was land for peace, which they clearly don't want? So I think really what we disagree about, here's what I would put.
In just one sentence.
One sentence, with no subordinate clauses. How's that? The occupation is not going anywhere anytime soon. It's just not. And therefore, the question that I was trying to raise in the book is, can we learn to think about each other? And Israelis have to learn to think differently too, not just Americans. Can both sides learn to think about the other differently so we can embrace the successes that it represents, understanding that the occupation that this side really hates and that many people on our side also really finds very distasteful and problematic? Can we somehow learn to have a conversation about these two communities that is not occupation-centric, because the occupation is going to be here for a very, very long time?
Okay, Rachel, future Prime Minister of Israel. As Prime Minister, how would you deal with this rift? If you think there is a rift, by the way, because some people don't think there is one.
Okay, so I'll take it first back, and I want to say a few things. I think what you were talking about, Benny Gantz, if it will change the relationship with the American Jewish community, I agree that it probably wouldn't too much. I think that in all the major issues that we're dealing with in Israel, occupation, yes, no, state religion, the Arab Israelis, what Gabizon was talking about in the morning, I think all of these major issues, there won't be any breakthrough in the next few years, no matter who is prime minister. I think it's important that there'll be a different party that will rule in Israel, because I think there are too many years that the Likud has been in power. I was in the coalition, I've seen what it does.
And even though your party is now with the Likud.
I'm not with my party.
Okay,
okay. That kind of happened. So even though I don't think there'll be major change in all these fundamental issues, so yes, also in the relationship with the American Jewish community, I don't think there'll be major change. I do think this discussion is very important, and although I don't agree with you, Daniel, with quite a bit of what you're saying, I think it's important.
What don't you agree with, though?
Okay, because I think that, let me move on. I think that what's important is that we're airing out this discussion. So I think we are one nation, okay? But I think that we are two very different communities. And trying to say we're the same nation, we're not really giving ourselves an opportunity to talk about the differences. So I think that's what's very important in the book. But I think that we need to think about it more. Sometimes I think of the American Jewish community as like a couple that needs to go to couple therapy. My bachelor's is in psychology, so. You see, usually when you go to couple therapy, I didn't go, but I know because I studied it. So usually when you go, one of the first stages is to see, maybe one of the partners is going through something themselves, and sometimes that's what has to be handled before we can have couple therapy. Now, I think in many ways, we are still defining our Judaism in Israel. We are still defining almost everything about ourselves. So as we're defining, the American Jewish community is much more defined, even though now there are still some new definitions, but the Reform community, the conservative community, they're all communities that were built during this century or century and a half where the entire Judaism has changed so dramatically. So the American Jewish community kind of found a way to integrate Judaism into their life. In Israel, and I think we have an excuse because we were establishing a state, building our economy, winning wars, doing everything we had to do. And now we're in a time where we're trying to define what does it mean to be, what does it mean, the Israeli Judaism? And one thing that's important to understand is that I don't think it will be similar to American Judaism. It's not going to be Reform Judaism. I know that Reform and conservative movements in the United States, often they think that soon the Israelis will be Reform. That's not going to happen because Reform and conservative movements were established for people that live in the United States during that century. And in Israel, we're working to define it. This is very hard work. I've been doing it for the past 15 years. I paid a lot of prices for it, going back and forth to the Supreme Court, fighting with ultra-Orthodox, not easy situations, but this is part of this defining. And once we define ourselves, I think that's when it will be easier to have this kind of negotiation. But at the same time, I think that once we realize that we're not going to be identical no matter what. And when you get married, and sometimes like in the first year, so you're like, oh, we'll do everything together. And after you're like, if we're going to do everything together, I'm not going to do half the things I like doing, and he's not going to do half the things he likes doing. So I think we need to try to think about it in the same way. So if the heading of the panel was, are we together for the kids? No, we're together because I hope we love each other. I do. My mother made Aliyah from the United States when she was 18, and my father made Aliyah from Tunis when he was 6. So I love both communities, and I feel very committed. I think that we can see that we kind of love each other, because when we look in Israel, Zvika and I were talking about it, how suddenly, the American Jewish community and what's happening to Jews around the world, it's like a big thing. It's like very in Israel. You're like, right. You became a rock star over the past year. Yeah. Who thought that would happen? I mean, I'm joking, but that's
my
like
mother, just my mother.
That's your mother,
Nobody
okay. But it's like suddenly this became this issue, and everyone's talking about it. So I think that's also what happens with families, that we never really split apart, and that's what I don't agree. But I think that we need to air out this kind of discussion and see how we redefine the relationship. So.
I'm wondering what each of you think we have to learn from the other sides. For instance, I could tell you I was an emissary, a shaliach, for the Jewish agency in South Florida a few years ago. It was a long time ago. And I remember, Israelis go on shlichut, and they're like, we're gonna go there for a year, 2 years, and we're gonna make all those American Jews want to make Aliyah. Like, you don't say it out loud, but like, it's in your head. Like, that's kind of what you think you're going to do. And I remember I was in this Jewish community in South Florida, an amazing Jewish community, and it was so difficult for me to internalize the fact that I wanted to live there. I wanted to be part of that amazing Jewish community that I was working in. The synagogue had, amazing content every single day, different shiurim, different lectures, a scholar in residence. The schools, the school I taught in wasn't so good, but the other ones were amazing. And you saw chesed, people helping each other out, families eating together on Shabbat, 3-4 families together. It kind of reminded me of my childhood in a settlement in a yeshuv in Israel. And I'm wondering what you guys think we can learn from the other side, like what the American Jews have to learn from Israel, and what Israelis need to learn from American Jews. Danny, you want to start?
So on both sides, I think, what Israelis have to learn from American Jews has to do a lot with the value of pluralism, with the value of religious creativity, with the ability of feminism to impact to greater degrees the religious edifice, and so on and so forth. I think, if you look, where I live in South Jerusalem, and you look at the institutions that are really kind of shaping, certainly Jerusalem, and I think wider ranges out, the Israel Democracy Institute, Shalem College, where I work, the Hartman Institute, Pardes, Kilat Zion. I mean, you can go on and on and on and on. These are all institutions that are, number one, founded by people with some sort of Anglo connection and roots, and quite frankly, also funded by a lot of Anglo money. And these things have huge implications across Israel. I mean, obviously, the waves are felt most strongly in Jerusalem and then beyond, but they're being copied, and Pelech has been copied in Rehovot and other kinds of places. So I think that, feminism, tolerance, pluralism, civility of discourse, these are issues that Israelis are learning to an extent from America, and there's a lot more to learn. What do Israelis have to teach American Jews? About a sense of devotion to something larger than oneself. In other words, the fact that you are expected to serve your country. This would be a much better country if every 18-year-old served their country in the army or or whatever it would be. Our kids are infinitely better human beings and more sophisticated human beings because they give up a chunk of years for that. I think the incredible importance of speaking a Jewish language. Language is not simply utilitarian, how you walk into a restaurant and order a something or other. A language says everything about belonging and so on and so forth. And I think, quite frankly, the importance of homeland. It's not an accident that that Israelis are thriving. And Rachel is 1,000% right. There's some unbelievably fascinating things happen in terms of the way Israelis are reinventing Judaism. And Shmuel Rosner's new book, with Camille Fuchs, which was just translated into English, called Israel, hashtag, of course, Israeli Judaism, is a really interesting way to kind of see some of the things that are developing. But those kinds of things can't happen when you're 3% of the population. They can only happen when you're 80% of the population. You feel a different kind of sense of being able to expand your lungs and spread out your wings and do things. So I think that American Jews can learn about the importance of land, the importance of language, the importance of commitment to a larger self. And I think together what we have to learn how to do is, as Rachel said, and as I tried to argue in the book, is we are really, really very different. And what we have to, hopefully, we want to use the couples therapy analogy, which I actually also use in the book. When you're in your 40s or in your 50s and you go for couples therapy, for whatever reason you're going to go, if the therapy is entirely successful, you're still not getting back to where you were when you were 18, holding hands along the Santa Barbara beach as the sun was setting. That's done. You're just not going back there. You're going to have a much more different, a much more sophisticated, nuanced, not nearly as lovey-dovey, but hopefully even more meaningful kind of a relationship. We're done with the 18-year-old stuff, and we've been through some very hard times together. If we can recognize that we both are extraordinarily successful Jewish accomplishments, but we're also both deeply existentially threatened, and we don't know where the future lies for anybody in the Jewish world, then we need each other, and we embrace each other because we understand that the Jewish people is going to move forward and rise or fall together. That's the way history has always been. So I think there's a tremendous amount of mutuality here despite our differences.
Okay, Michael?
So a little bit similar. I would say what American Jews should be learning from Israeli Jews are about ties that bind. Within the American Jewish community, Israel for a long time was the tie that bound everything together, and it certainly no longer is to the extent that it once was. And frankly, I've written recently that I think that American Jews certainly should not embrace anti-Zionism by any means, but should perhaps make Israel itself less of a focus of American Judaism because it's crowding out everything else. And if American Jews are discontented with Israel and there are no other ties that bind, then American Judaism itself is going to fall apart. And so I think that American Jews should look at, Danny mentioned Hebrew, that's a great one, right? I think that there should be an absolute rededication, or perhaps rededication is the wrong word, dedication, among American Jews to learning a common language that is unique to Judaism.
But can you learn Hebrew without focusing on Israel?
Yes, I think you can.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that the two have to be
Really?
tied together at all. And again, I'm not saying remove Israel from the American Jewish conversation by any means. But I think
Yehuda
that,
Halevi, Shlomo Ibn Gviro, they weren't Zionists.
right, and there was no.
ליבי במזרח ואנוכי בסוף מערב?
No, but there was no Jewish entity. These people grew up in and were raised in deeply Hebraic, right, centuries and centuries ago, before Theodor Herzl had, but Twinkle.
But living,
Right, or even
the
before,
living language of Hebrew today is in a country. You know what I'm
Sure.
saying? You're not learning an historic language. I mean, the language is historic, but you're not
But it
going to
can be
teach
done. That's the
kids.
only point. It can be done.
They're
Right,
going
it
to
can be
want to
done.
sing
Before-
Tudu Bom, Static and Benel. They're going to want to, Omer Adam.
fine,
They're not,
before, but before Hebrew
Neta
was Yiddish,
Barzilai.
right? Jews throughout history have a language that bound them together. So today, the obvious answer would be Hebrew. I'm not saying let's revitalize Yiddish as a language. Whether it's that, whether it's frankly a greater dedication to Torah study, right? Something else that can bind Jews together. Whatever it is, I think that's something that Israeli Jews have in some ways almost naturally because they are more of a defined nation. But I think that's something that American Jews can certainly learn.
And the opposite, what do we
And the opposite, I think that Israeli Jews need to learn from American Jews the mechanisms for existing in a place where you're not the majority. And obviously in Israel, Jews are the majority, but of course Israel is not the majority in the world by any sense. And it's interesting when you think about Israeli Jews and American Jews, how they view their security. So for Israeli Jews, they obviously view the state of Israel as the ultimate bedrock of their security. They have a state, it's a state of their own, it has an army, it protects them, and that is the key to Jewish security and Jewish survival. In the United States, American Jews look at things very differently. American Jews, for the most part, look at the key to their security as protection of all minorities, not just Jews. Because as a small minority in this country, 2%, most of us understand that only if all minorities are safe will we be safe as well. And so it's this lesson that I don't think Israeli Jews ever have to grapple with, because they aren't a minority in their country, of course. But here, American Jews don't look at Israel as their ultimate guarantor here. They perhaps look at Israel as their ultimate guarantor down the road if disaster.
How would they be able to feel a minority if, I'm saying, like...
So I think that the same way that American Jews recognize that, if all minorities are protected, it's better for them, I think that Israel on the world stage could do a better job of looking at other countries that are perhaps in also precarious situations and trying to build alliances with them, understanding that when there is a world order that protects all states, not based on how big and how strong they are, but because they are states and have rights to exist, that may ultimately be a better strategy for Israel in terms of living in the world than simply glomming on to might makes right.
Okay. Rachel?
I think what Israelis should learn from the American Jewish community is much more innovation in Judaism. We're very innovative in everything else, but like Judaism, we don't really dare to touch. So like Hartman, all of that is more American-based that we kind of are learning along the way. So I think that's one thing. And I hope what the American Jewish community will learn from Israelis is not to take our politicians so seriously. It's like any politician in Israel that really, backseat kind of, he can get up and say something horrible about the American Jewish community because he's talking to his constituency. They need to vote for him for the, inner circles in his party. He has no idea and I would get such backlash from it. And I was like, come on, don't take him so seriously. But he's an MK. Yeah, okay. But, so, and Israelis, we don't take our politicians so seriously. I think it would ease, in many ways, this relationship if we could do that. So, That's it.
I never thought about that. That's interesting. So it's interesting. So as an Israeli who visits the U.S. Occasionally, so like now I'm here, and one of the things my wife told me to get last year, I was around the same time of year, I was on a different conference, and she said you have to get those Hanukkah clothes for the kids because in Israel, I mean I don't know if you know where, but like Carter's or any other stores here will have like there's like tons of merchandise for Hanukkah and for like any other holiday, and in Israel I can't get it. And then it could be funny, but then again, like why in the Jewish state can I get all this like fun Jewish stuff, which is actually it's not just it's not just shallow. It's something that can create discussion or meaning. That's not the only thing I think we have to learn from American Jews. But I want to get back to Michael on what you said about not focusing as much on Israel. And as an Israeli, even though I understand where you're coming from, like it disturbs me. I know that many synagogues, Reform and conservative synagogues here in the U.S. Have passed certain rules in the synagogue where either the rabbi or other people who are speaking should not speak about Israel because Israel is a divisive topic. So is that, in a way, maybe, I mean, again, like, we're not going to be those lover, where the American Jews were like romanticized whatever about Israel and thought it was like, this pure holy thing. But if we're moving this in that direction, then I don't know, is there a way back?
I think that American Judaism has to take itself seriously as an independent project. So that does not mean to disconnect from Israel or to divorce from Israel, but to the extent that American Jewish identity is consumed with Israel and almost nothing else, it's not going to make for a robust American Judaism. And,
so what should the connection be?
What should the connection be? I think that Israel absolutely should be a big part of American Jewish identity, but it shouldn't be the only part. The fact that the largest...
It isn't the only part today.
In a lot of ways it is. The fact that the largest gathering of American Jews every single year is AIPAC conference is interesting, right? Because that's not something that's specifically Jewish, right? It's about Israel. You couldn't possibly get 20,000 American Jews in the same place on a subject unique to American Judaism. You couldn't do it. I can't think of anything that would unite people.
What do you mean every holiday? Sorry, every holiday you have, at least the 3 days, you have hundreds and thousands, if not more, of Jews, millions practicing, Judaism that has nothing to do with Israel. So it's not in one place because technically it's different, but at the same time, everyone's doing the same thing.
So certainly it's not every holiday.
No, I said whatever.
Like once a year.
Pesach, Rosh Hashanah.
Right. Let's say it's a Pesach Seder, or people who go to Shul on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur.
That's fine.
Fine.
That's more than 8. How many days is AIPAC?
20,000.
No, how many days?
Oh, how many days? 3.
Like 2
you
days
see?
and a lobbying day.
There you go. It's the same thing.
Yeah, but that's also a much easier. That's a much easier commitment, right? I mean, a Pesach Seder in particular, right, where most people aren't going to shul beforehand, right? They sit in their house and they do a Seder and they have something. But my point is, I would prefer for American Judaism to focus much more on all the holidays as opposed to just a Seder and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. One of the Peter Barnett wrote something a few years ago, which is one of the smartest things I've ever read. It had nothing to do with Israel. It was a piece saying that American Jews, if they want their kids to take Judaism seriously, instead of celebrating Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and being the days that you take your kids to shul, he said, take them for Sukkot, take them for Purim, take them for holidays that are actually fun and different and meandrameaningful, as opposed to just sit in shul for 6 hours and be bored and listen to a drasha and be done with it. I think that American Jews for too long have allowed Israel to crowd out Judaism as practice, and I think that we would be better off if we brought some of the balance a little more toward Judaism qua Judaism as opposed to Judaism qua Israel.
So if in 10 years from now Z3 is the largest Jewish gathering, would you be happy? That has to do with Israel.
Well, it's not just about Israel. It's also discussing issues of Judaism as well. But no, I think I'd be happier. I'm not somebody who does Daf Yomi, but I think I'd be happier if the largest annual gathering was. I guess it would have to be every 7.5 years, not every year. But if Daf Yomi was the largest gathering as opposed to AIPAC, I think that would say something about American Jews' commitment to Judaism as opposed.
Why don't you stick to Purim? Oh, really? Daf Yomi, Right.
Yeah, Daf Yomi.
Danny, do you want to react to this?
Well, look, I actually think I agree with Michael. I agree with Michael about this. I think one of the great, again, I as somebody who was born here, raised here, lived here for 2/3 of my life at this point. Here's to me the great problem of American Judaism. If you took Israel, you just sucked Israel out of the equation. What else is there in American Jewish life that people get worked up about? No, I'm serious. Because you actually care about the things. It's not a Jewish issue.
I know.
It's not a Jewish issue. What other Jewish issue? No, look, the things that you care about, the things that you care.
The other
how do you know to go back
to
the couples thing? How do you know the relationship's dead when the couple stops even caring enough to argue? When it's just, okay, whatever, this thing is going to end. And it'll end nicely, it'll end not nicely, but it's over. The question is, in American Jewish life, what issue is there that, yes, of course, millions of people or thousands of people go to shul on Yom Kippur, but it's not evoking passion. The question is, what in American Jewish life evokes passion other than Israel. And the truth of the matter is it's a very, very small set of things. I actually can't think of anything. And just to, again, we just finished, 3 more weeks, we're winding up 7 months of living in Boston. And it's been a lot of fun. And we alternated. Every other Shabbat, we were at the Orthodox Minyan at Harvard Hillel. And on the alternate Shabbats, we were at the egalitarian Minyan called the Cambridge Minyan. So I'm kind of hedging my theological bets, you know, who knows what, you know, whatever. So the Orthodox Minyan, the egalitarian Minyan, somewhere in the middle there is probably okay. I don't think we missed that many Shabbatot at all. In 7 months of unbelievably smart Divrei Torah, because these are really smart people in Cambridge, Massachusetts, I have to say, the word Israel was not mentioned one time.
Wow.
Not one time in 7 months in the Orthodox Minyan or the egalitarian Minyan. Partly because, as you said, it's become too toxic, partly because there may be sort of, you know, hanchayot, how do you say hanchayot, guidelines that you're not supposed to touch it. Right. But also, as you talk to American Jewish professionals, which I've been doing a lot more these last 7 months, they talk openly about Yehuda Kurtzer, who's actually here at this conference also, was at a meeting where I was listening to him very attentively, talking about how people are now constructing robust American Jewish identities, of which Israel is simply not a constituent component. Like Pakistan is not part of there, and Israel's not a part of it. As an Israeli, that makes me unbelievably sad. I don't think it makes it illegitimate. It just makes me really sad. But what I worry about American Jewish life is if you pull Israel out of the equation, what are people going to argue about? No, seriously, you only care about things that you argue about. What are you going to argue about? We argue about politics because we care about the future of America. We argue about maybe climate change because we care about the future of the planet. What do we argue about Jewishly if it's not Israel? And the answer is very, very little. That scares me more than anything else. And I think that, again, to go back to what Michael's saying, I think that creating a robust Jewish identity, which is deeply embedded in Jewish sources, which is deeply embedded in Jewish ideas, which is predicated on the notion that the Jews have been around for a very long time because we've always thought we've had something to say to the world. But if what we have to say to the world is identical as progressive politics in America, there's a lot more Protestants. They'll do the work. What do they need us for? What are we saying that's different from everybody else? And the only way we can say something that's different is if we go back to our texts and back to our sources, and that remains a complete Control-Alt-Delete on 90% of American Jewish education. Israelis here, I think, really here we do have a leg up. I mean, I think if you look at the Rosner Fuchs book and others, something really creative and interesting is happening in Israeli Judaism, and I think Americans could learn something about that too.
Okay, I want to get to questions from the audience. Just one question with like a short answer, if you can try. If you can think of any solution to all these, you know, issues we mentioned about, you know, I mean, you kind of maybe gave us some sort of a solution to focus on, you know, American Jewish identity. But if any of you have an idea of a solution that could help create some sort of bridging this gap or strengthening each side's identity, but in a very short...
Massive rise in anti-Semitism.
I'm sorry?
A massive rise in anti-Semitism. I say this not kiddingly. Tragically may not be imaginary, and it would bring us together. It's the worst possible reason. But
it works.
But unfortunately, tragically, it
right.
works. But I would say we have to go back to the sources, as that book once was called. What's made us Jews for thousands of years is regardless of how we practiced, there was a set of texts that animated our conversations. That's what it's got to be again.
Okay, Michael.
I think that we have to know each other much more. And listen, we come to this conference, and I think we all know all the Israelis that are here.
Right.
I mean, it can't be that. I mean, and I was in the Knesset
I actually
for
met many Israelis here who live like very
live
close
here.
to me for the first time.
Here.
No,
that live here.
next to me
of
for the first time here.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So I was in the Knesset for 4 years, so I didn't want to miss the work there. So I didn't come to this the first time that I'm here after many years. But it's the same crowd, and I mean, that's not talking to Israelis. I'm sorry, it's talking, just like in Israel we say, it's not really talking to American, it's American Jewish professionals that that's what they do. That's what's happening in Israel, that's not good. And I once had this idea, and I couldn't persuade the Ministry of Education, but to make an opportunity for teachers to come to the camps here in the United States, the Jewish camps. And for the teachers in Israel, that's great, because, they'll come with their family, it's a summer in the United States. And for the camps, it's amazing, because you get, excellent educators. They'll have to be excellent because they have to get accepted. And it means, there's like a week or two that you miss an Israeli school year. So it means some kind of adjustment. But I think that much more of these kind of meetings, mayors, much less politicians and, like regular, real people, mayors, people, teachers, principals, like people that are
Mayors
on ground.
aren't real people, maybe educators.
Mayors in Israel are more and more real people, but I think also in America, I think that's something that's changing in the world. But whatever, never mind. Like these kind of people to learn how to work together and to learn for each other, I think would be great. So.
Okay.
Yeah, similar. I would just say there needs to be greater understanding of what on each side what the other side actually thinks. I think that American Jews largely have a caricature of Israeli Jews in Israeli society, and I think the Israeli Jews largely have a caricature of American Jews in American Jewish society. And maybe it means a reverse birthright, which is something people have spoken about.
It actually exists.
So I mean,
Starting,
it exists, and Gesher brings people to the United States, but I think in a more robust fashion. And I'd love to see American Jews when they go to Israel not just go for bar mitzvah at the hotel or go for Pesach and they don't leave their hotel, right? Like actually go when it's not a holiday and get out into the country and see sort of what Israelis are actually doing and how they're living.
Right. Okay, I just want to say I agree with you about the summer camp issue. There's this program I run actually together with Gesher, with the president's office, and we had this event for educators, and we wanted who were on these reverse birthrights, and we wanted to create some sort of, like a serious level of content to get them in to continue their journey with diaspora. And I said, I want the president's residence, the whole campus there to be a summer camp, like to turn it into a summer camp, as much as you can with like signs and whatever this and that. And I wasn't able to convince them, so I did bring in one young girl from a Jewish camp, and that was the highlight of the event. She wasn't like a doctor or a journalist or whatever. She spoke, and she was able to affect like all of them. So we're going to open it up for questions, and please, if you can, even though this is a Jewish conference, try and ask questions and not just give us statements. Okay, so the young guy in the middle.
I'm Israeli.
Okay.
From accent. I'm also non-believer. What do you suggest for me to do with my own kids, which are 11 and 13 years old boys? What should I do with them to keep their identity? I'm not sure which identity, but maybe Jewish, maybe Israeli identity here in the States.
Good question. Okay, so does anybody want to answer? Yeah, okay, I'll repeat the question, okay? He said he is an Israeli living here who is a non-believer, and he wanted to know what the panelists think about how they think he should educate his children to continue in some sort of identity, whether it being Jewish or Israeli. He wasn't necessarily sure which one.
I mean, I think it depends on which one. So where I live outside of DC, and there are many Israelis who live outside of DC, either because they came working for the embassy and they stayed, or we have a very big Israeli expat community, and they tend to live in homogenous Israeli communities. We have there's a community close to my house that everybody calls the kibbutz, another one everybody calls the moshav. My kids, my daughter, my youngest who's 4, who's still in preschool, is at our local JCC, and half of her class is Israeli. I think that if you want to be an Israeli in the United States and preserve an Israeli identity, it's depending on where you live, it's actually relatively easy to do so. I think it's probably going to be a lot harder to preserve a Jewish identity in the United States without actively engaging with the wider Jewish community, particularly because I think a lot of the Israelis who come to the US and remain in kind of Israeli-only communities, they tend to be less Jewishly affiliated. They're much more concerned about their Israeli identity than their Jewish identity. And whereas in Israel, because it is a Jewish state, you can have both of those things at once. That's very hard to do here without actively working on the Jewish identity part of it.
Okay, Rachel?
Summer camps, sorry, but that's a big deal. It is a big deal and it works. And those here, yeah. Now, we're Israelis. We don't send our kids far away.
Summer
for 2
camps
months.
here are way better than they are in Israel.
It's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah. So and also. I know that the Israeli community usually, although you're here, so I guess it's not exactly that way, but usually isn't so much at the JCCs and stuff like that. But I know there is, I mean, I hope there is more openness to, like, you know, organizing Israeli days at the JCC. I mean, I know that's happening in different places. I don't want to. But, you know, we have a lot of, like, Tu B'Shvat. Tu B'Shvat is a great holiday in Israel. And obviously Purim, and you think of the sad days, you have the Memorial Day, Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaShoah, Retzach Rabin, you know, we have quite a few of these tough ones. Of course, Yom HaAtzmaut, you know, we have there, and that's more Israeli kind of than, it could be Jewish, but whatever. And I, you know, I just want to say something else, that I learned that whenever something is very important to me, it's more than attending something, but organizing something. So, you know, if you organize something, so then the entire family is active. Like whenever I passed legislations, my children knew what you know, I wanted extra weeks for maternity leave. So I had my 12-year-old daughter, she was rooting for me, you know, you'll do it. It was against all odds. And she said, you'll do it. And when I got it, when it passed, I called her. She was the first one I called to tell her, you know, the legislation passed. So if you do something with excitement, so your kids join in, so you're fine. That's so.
Okay. Danny, nothing.
Agreed.
Okay, I just want to say one thing to what you asked is it drives me crazy that Israelis come here and then when they're here they want to connect to the Jewish identity, and I feel like, you know, Israelis that had that experience here should try in some way to send that message back home, either if they're staying here or if they move back to Israel, that there needs to be some sort of Israeli secular or whatever movement of Judaism. I mean, there are definitely, but you know, that understand that it's not a threat, you know. As a religious person, I could tell you that it annoys me that in Israel, you know, secular people feel they can't practice their Judaism. Yeah. Okay.
What's the question?
Okay.
Well, I'll just respond quickly. I think that that's actually not what's going on in Israel anymore. I mean, I think you're 1,000% right. That was an apt description of what was going on with Israel and secularism and Zionism 30 years ago. It's completely not what's going on now. I mean, when I look at the students who study at Shalem, who are all Israeli, 100% of them are Israelis, and the vast majority of them are not Anglos, whatever, the amount of religious searching on the part of secular Jews, not religious searching because they're going through some massive thing and they want to become chozrim b'tshuva. They just are looking to become part of the Jewish people's conversation with tradition, with each other, and so on and so forth. So they fill a place like Zion on Friday night for Kabbalat Shabbat, and then they leave before Ma'ariv because they're not there to daven, but they do want to spend an hour singing and
Just
talking.
mention what Sion is.
Sion is a kind of an egalitarian but very traditional minyan in South Jerusalem that attracts Orthodox and secular and men and women and Ethiopians and whites. It's actually an amazing thing run by a woman rabbi named Tamara Led Applebaum. But my point more broadly is I think there's a tremendous amount of experimentation and yearning going on among Israelis, and I think it's also really super important for us to know one of the causes for this, which is that Mizrahim, who were once really shunted to the side of Israel's socioeconomic, cultural, political enterprise, are now making their way in, and they are the majority of Israeli Jews. And for them, they're not halachic, but they never shunted away the importance of being at a Shabbat table, of doing, and I think the Ashkenazim are learning from these Mrachim in a certain way that it doesn't all have to make perfectly good theological sense. There's just something wonderful and warm about being part of this tradition. So I think your description is apt 30 years ago. I think it's really changing now tremendously.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, in the back.
No, The girl. The girl and then the boy. Sorry. You have to let the girl.
Yeah. So we'll start with her and then, yeah. Maybe we'll take these two questions one after another. Okay.
So I'm an Israeli college student, but I've also lived in America for the majority of my life. How am I supposed to continue being Jewish and Israeli if Israel's out of the equation? Because I no longer live with my parents, and I can't have them educate me. But I'm also in this kind of turmoil where I'm assuming to become Jewish on campus. I have to defend Israel no matter what, because that's just how the situation is. So how am I supposed to be more creative with my Judaism when there's constantly this battle of you have to defend Israel and be an ambassador for Israel?
Okay, and we'll just get the other question.
You used the word caricature earlier. Can you come up with some suggestions for how American Jews can better understand Israel, other than go to Israel? Assume a person can't make the trip. What can American Jews do so they don't see Israel as a caricature?
Okay, so we have two questions. How can we see American Jews see Israel not as a character, and how can we connect, to our Judaism without Israel on campus? So, Michael, maybe you want to start.
Sure, I'll take that second one first. So I would say read Israeli news every single day. I think if you can do it in Hebrew, great. If you can't, almost every single major Israeli paper now has an English language edition. So keep up with the actual debates that are going on in Israel. Second, I would say immerse yourself in as much Israeli culture as you can. We also live in a time now where Israeli TV, Israeli movies, Israeli music are so easily accessible in the United States. And I think that if you do those two things, you'll get a much better grasp of the way Israelis speak and think and what they're talking about. Whether you agree with what they're saying or not, I think you'll have a better sense of what is actually taking place in Israel without being there.
Okay, Rachel.
I agree with the newspaper, with with what you said about how to learn about Israel without being there. But I want to say something about the campus. Before, Danny, we were talking about the army, how the army is, years that it really changes you. And I think that in many ways, I want to say that these years on campus, it's like you're becoming like your combat years. They're very hard. I know they're intensive. You have to stand up for something bigger than you that you're not sure you identify with, but you just kind of have to. And people perceive you in a different way necessarily than you would want them to perceive you. But so that's why I also have a hard time thinking that really Israel is out of the equation. I think people are trying to escape from Israel because it's not always comfortable to discuss or convenient, but Israel is still part of the equation. And yes, defending Israel sometimes is not so easy. And I do think, we didn't really we talked a bit about how to make the relationship easier, but I do think that it's also our responsibility, I don't see how we can end the occupation tomorrow morning. If we could, we tried it for 20 years, with the Oslo Accords, didn't work. So, but I do think that we need to make it easier for you in the sense that, think about how to prepare you maybe, or maybe that's something the Jewish community needs to do, but there should be much more preparation. I talked about combat. I think, just like in basic training, you're prepared for these difficult years. So I'm sorry I became so army-oriented, but I think that this is something that you have to come much more prepared to campus, and I do think it would be very wise if Israel would take some responsibility on this issue.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. In front.
Okay, so in the beginning you were talking a little bit about politicians and policy and whether or not changes there would change the relationship. And I wonder why, if Israel in a civic way addressed some of the biggest challenges facing the younger generation in every country in the world, why that wouldn't be one of the solutions. I'm not talking about a mission to Mars, but a more fair system of education, universal health care,
But that's all going on.
Right, exactly.
Things
In other
are
words, first of all,
happening.
show me the Western society that has solved all the problems. I mean, let's.
Western societies have. None of them have.
Okay, but Israel has universal health care. And one of the things that I cannot explain to our students is how does the richest country on the face of the earth have, after Obamacare, 40 million people not covered by basic health care? Israelis cannot understand that. Okay, number one, Tel Aviv is one of the most gay, lesbian-friendly cities in the world. Number three, Israelis, when I tell them what don't ask, don't tell was, they think I'm kidding. They actually think I'm lying. They say, no, seriously, what did it mean? And I tell them, they say, no, come on, we're not in the mood. What did it really mean? Because they can't in their wildest imagination figure out why any army would care who you slept with. They want to know, can you do your job or not do your job? Here's the problem that Israel faces. There are almost nobody sleeping in the streets of Israel.
Yeah.
There's plenty of poverty.
Barely any unemployment.
There's hardly any unemployment. There's hardly anybody sleeping in the streets. Every single person has health care. It's an unbelievably tolerant society for
No
gays and
violence in
lesbians.
schools.
I go on and on and on. And how much of that gets discussed here? None. It just doesn't. It gets no traction because both from the press and the academy, and frankly from many American Jews, they don't want to talk about our healthcare successes, our gay and lesbian successes, our homeless successes.
Oh, but
All
there
they
is-
want to talk
I'm
about
sorry,
is the occupation.
But there is. I mean, we did there were movies on these issues, and, I think a lot of what we do in art is, and in fact, what you're talking about is like the Golda Meir kind of thing. That's how when she worked on the foreign affairs, that was a big issue. So I think I do agree with you, and there was once an attempt to discuss, I was a Green Course Students for the Environment 20 years ago. I was this big, environmentalist activist. And there was this conference that we did with American, environmentalist activists, Jews, because we thought there was an idea that maybe would bring us together. It was very hard. It was very hard. Everything immediately, you can't talk about environment if you're occupying. You can't. Justice is justice, and this kind of thing. And so, I mean, I wish it would work because I think we're a pretty nice country. We have our complications, and mind you, I was in politics, so I know. But it's very hard to discuss this. But I do think the only place it really works is art. Homeland, all of that kind of Our Boys, it kind of gives the perspective.
I would personally say not Our Boys.
Our Boys I think it was, I was deputy mayor of Jerusalem at the time, okay? I saw everything
Our Boys is the
on
series,
ground.
Netflix series now regarding...
Muhammad Abu Khder.
Right, okay.
Yeah, I saw it on ground. It is pretty accurate. And I think I think that when you look at it...
Without representing the fact that 3 young
But that's not the
boys
movie,
were
it doesn't
hijacked
matter.
and
Okay,
killed.
never mind, we won't get into
But
that.
we're not going to get into
We'll
that.
be here for another hour.
Okay. I just want to end. Thank you very much, everybody.
very much, Zvika.
I want to end with a sentence from Natan Sharansky, because what Michael said is still stuck in my head, and I got to work with it. But Natan Sharansky said there's 2 things that can help, that will let Jews survive outside of Israel. One is Zionism, and one is religion. If you have both of them, you will survive. Your next generation will survive as Jews. If you have one of them, you can survive, but you could even see different, extreme movements of not having Zionism there, and they're not in an amazing place sometimes, and a lot of people leaving them. And then the other side, you could have Zionism without religion. But if you don't have one of the 2, then there's probably no way for the next generation to keep on that. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you.